In the last segment of End of the Age, we studied the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2 about the Holy Roman Empire, and we proved that Jesus Christ will return to earth during the reign of the Holy Roman Empire, and that the Antichrist and the false prophet will in fact come from this reborn Holy Roman Empire. Now, we contended last segment that this has already now happened, that the Holy Roman Empire is now reborn. Now we want to explain. Here's what happened concerning the rebirth of the Holy Roman Empire. After World War II, the empires of Europe lay in ashes because of the plunder of Nazi Germany and of World War II. Great Britain, Germany, France, Italy, all the big powers of Europe were reduced to rubble. Now, these were the old traditional powers that ran the world, however. They didn't want to be left outside of the power equation of the world to come. There were two emerging nuclear superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States of America. Winston Churchill foresaw that there had to be a radical realignment, or else Europe would become irrelevant. He actually proposed in a speech shortly after World War II was over that there would be established a United States of Europe. He said in this day of the nuclear superpower, it takes 200 million population in order to have the population base and the economic resources to play ball in the day of the nuclear superpower. He said, we either forget our differences and unify as one in Europe, creating a United States of Europe. He actually used that term, or else all of the power will move to the Soviet Union and the United States of America. Well, the old proud states of Europe were used to playing a central role in world affairs, and they did not want to be shunted to the side of history. Consequently, they made a decision. In 1957, there was a treaty signed called the Treaty of Rome. They created, with the signing of the Treaty of Rome, what's called the common market. The first goal was economic union, but that was not the ultimate goal. The leaders knew that economic union had to come first, but political union was sure to follow, because once you join entities together economically, they have to pass laws to control and regulate their interaction, and ultimately you would build a body of laws that would become a political union as well as an economic union. So this was all set in motion by 6 nations. They signed the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Many others of the nations of Europe doubted that it would work, so they sat on the sidelines. However, it worked better than most people thought it could. Quickly, other people lined up to join this common market. They started with 6, then there became 9, then there was 10, then there was 12, then there was 15. By 1992, all of the economic barriers were down so that you could raise crops in Germany and sell them in France, just like you could raise crops in Indiana and sell them in Illinois. All tariffs, all economic barriers were gone by 1992. And some people said, success. But the real leaders said, no, that's only phase 1. Immediately, they called another meeting at Maastricht, Holland, and they formed a new treaty called the Maastricht Treaty. The goal of this treaty was to go from economic union to political union. Well, by 1999, they had their common money, the euro. All of you are familiar with the euro. By then, the European Union, by 2004, the European Union expanded to 25 member states. We're talking about 25 nations have now merged their economies, plus many of them had gotten rid of their money and adopted the common money of Europe, the euro. And by 2007, there were 27 members in what became known as the European Union. It wasn't the common market anymore because that phase was over. They now took upon themselves the name the European Union. And by 2007, they were the world's #1 economic power. They had 500 million population with the greatest economic might on the face of the planet. Now, that was where they were at that point, but the mission was not yet completed. We want to pause right now to ask this question, because I'm painting a scenario here that I'm asking you to believe that the European Union was really the prophesied rebirth of the Holy Roman Empire, of the prophesied Holy Roman Empire, out of which the Antichrist, the false prophet, will soon emerge. Now, is that really true, or am I simply reading something into this that's not there? Well, they decided they would start printing money. Their first money was printed in 1987, a coin called the ECU, the European Currency Unit. And when they decided to print their first money as the European Union, they were looking for someone's picture that would really convey the meaning of what was going on. I wonder, can you guess whose picture they chose to symbolize what was really taking place? Well, here's a copy of the coin. You can see it for yourself. They put the picture of Charlemagne. Remember, he was the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Pope Leo III placed the crown on his head on Christmas Day, December 25, 800 AD. Now they decide to put his picture on their first coin. Was it because they understood that they were actually presiding over the rebirth of the Holy Roman Empire? You better believe. Now, that's not the only proof we have, because they decided about this time that they would award a prize annually for the statesperson in the world that had done the most that year to promote European unification, the realization of their United States of Europe dream. They were looking for a name for this prize for European unification. And can you guess what they decided the prize should be called? Well, here it is. It's the Charlemagne Prize. It's given every year. Right now, you can see a picture of President Clinton. He received the Charlemagne Prize in the year 2000. Why? Because there was a problem with Yugoslavia. Europe had to have Yugoslavia as part of its United States of Europe, as part of its European Union. But Slobodan Milosevic didn't want to lose sovereignty, and he resisted being melted into the European Union. So he had to be removed. Well, President Clinton led the charge. He used the forces of NATO, and he took Slobodan Milosevic out of power. He ended up on trial before the World Court in The Hague, and today, you guessed it, Yugoslavia is now a part of the European Union. And President Clinton was given the prize for that. Actually, there were some interesting things said at the coronation of Clinton for that year's Charlemagne Prize. By the way, he went to Aachen, Germany, where the prize is awarded, and that's the home of Charlemagne. Still standing in Aachen is the cathedral he built in 800 AD, and you actually see President Clinton there receiving the prize. And listen to some of the things that Clinton said in his acceptance speech. The job of building a united Europe is certainly not finished. And it is important not to take all this self-congratulation too far, Clinton said, in becoming only the third American to receive the prestigious International Charlemagne Prize for promoting European unity. So Clinton understood fully what this prize was about. He understood what he was doing when he led the charge against Slobodan Milosevic, and he understood he got the prize for bringing Yugoslavia into the United States of Europe. Well, that's not all. Not only do we have the picture of Charlemagne on the first coin, not only do we have the Charlemagne Prize, but the most influential publication in Europe is a periodical called The Economist. Some people refer to it as the periodical of kings and presidents. It's by far the most influential periodical in Europe. It's owned by Lord Rothschild. It comes out weekly. And The Economist magazine has now devoted, over the past many years since the common market thrust was begun, they have devoted one page each week, each issue, to European unification, to the latest developments that week toward European unification. Now, can you possibly guess what they call this special page every week? Are you catching on yet? Here it is. They call it the Charlemagne page. Okay, do these people know what they're doing? Do they not? Oh, by the way, other nations are still lining up to join because the European Union is becoming more and more powerful, not only as an economic entity, but as a political union in the world. And many people still are making application to become a part of the European Union. Well, when they want to present their application, there is a special building in Brussels, which is the capital of the European Union. At Brussels, Belgium, there's a special building where they must apply and also where they must go to conduct the intricate negotiations required for them to become members of the European Union. Is there a chance that you might be able to guess what they call the building where they have to go to apply for membership in the European Union? Well, there it is. If you guessed Charlemagne Building, then you are right. So the question is, do these people know what they're doing? Charlemagne on their first money, Charlemagne Prize, Charlemagne page in the Economist magazine, Charlemagne Building where you go. Hey, I think they know what they're doing. I think they know that they are presiding over the rebirth of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, there's one more thing that you need to look at, because you can't have a nation unless you have a flag. Well, they have one. Here's their flag. If you'll look in the upper portion, you will see a blue flag with 12 gold stars superimposed on the flag. Now, immediately we say, what's that mean? Why do they have 12 stars? Somebody said, well, the U.S. flag, if we have 50 states, we have 50 stars. When we had 48 states, we had 48 stars. But they don't have 12 states. They now have 27, but they still have 12 stars. I actually asked the people at the Visitor Center at the Parliament building in Brussels. I was on a tour there. Why do you only have 12 stars on your flag? And they looked at me dumbfounded. They said, well, we got 12 members. I said, no, you got 27 members now. They said, well, we don't know. Well, I found out why they have 12 stars. The flag designer, Mr. Arsene Heitz, he's now over 80 years of age, but he designed the flag, and he wrote an article explaining why he designed the flag like he did. He did this because he believed that the Holy Roman Empire should have the holy element in it. And as a devout Catholic, he believed that the woman depicted in Revelation 12, verse 1 and 2, there's a woman there giving birth to a child with 12 stars about her head. He believed that that's the Virgin Mary there in Revelation 12, and so he should take the 12 stars from her head and put them on the flag, which sends a signal to those who understand these things. Europe is under the flag of Mary. The Catholic Church is very much alive and well and a part of the Holy Roman Empire. You're looking now at a picture of the Virgin Mary with the 12 stars about her head. This was taken from a church right there in Brussels, Belgium, and all over Europe, you'll see the 12 stars wherever you look. Now, beyond that, it's even interesting that they now have 12 stars on all the license plates of all the members of the European Union, and they now also have 12 stars on the euro, the money. So it's everywhere, and it's the symbol of the, remember, Holy Roman Empire, an alliance of church and state, of politics and religion. Now, there was one thing left that Europe needed to really be the United States of Europe or the European Union. They felt like they had to have a constitution. So they began to work on it. In October 29 of 2004, they actually signed a constitution. They got together, and in the same room where the Treaty of Rome was signed to found the common market way back in 1957, they all the members, there were 25 at the time, they signed the Constitution. However, there was a real problem because all of the participating nations, all 25 of them, had to have a vote of all their people, and all of their people had to agree to this new constitution. Well, can you imagine trying to get unanimous agreement among 25 nations? It was almost impossible. Well, it was impossible because in 2005, France held her referendum and the French people voted it down because they knew that this was going to mean the end of French sovereignty. Shortly thereafter, the people of Holland, they voted it down. So now then, Europe was, well, they were sent into 2 years of reassessment. What do we do now? We thought we just about had achieved our dream of the United States of Europe. We've been working on this since World War II. We've been working on this since the founding of the Holy Roman Empire in 1957, and now it looks like the whole thing has crumbled because of the short-sightedness of the French people and the Dutch people. And so they circled the wagons and thought, what can we do? However, you know how resourceful sometimes politicians can be. And some of the politicians said, you know, all is not lost. We'll never probably get enough votes for every single nation to approve it. But there's another way out of this impasse. You know, if we would convert this Constitution to a treaty and all of us adopt the treaty, we could get the same goal. And treaties do not require a referendum among all the people. So the idea was born. All 27 nations by now, on December the 13th of 2007, made their way to Lisbon, Portugal, and there they signed this new treaty, which everybody knew contained all the elements of the Constitution. But when is a Constitution not a Constitution? When the politicians say, oh, it's not a Constitution, it's a treaty. Abracadabra, we've got our problem solved. So all the nations signed. However, they still had to have ratification of the parliaments. They did not have to have a referendum, except for one problematic nation. Northern Ireland had it built in its constitution that it still had to hold a referendum. Well, nation after nation, France, Holland, they immediately started ratifying in their parliament. All's going well because now then the fate of the European Union is in the wiser hands of the politicians who know what's best for the people anyway when they don't know what's good for themselves. But when they got to the vote for Ireland, Ireland knew that this was the end of Irish sovereignty if they said yes, and they voted it down. So now we have one little nation spoiling the big dream. And quickly, the larger members of the European Union said to Ireland, if you want to stay in the European Union, you better find a way to change your vote. Well, they began to funnel money, and they launched a huge public relations campaign, spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and a year or so later, the Irish people decided they better vote again. And by now, they're in the middle of the economic crisis of 2008. And they begin to think, what if we were all out here all by ourselves? We have the protection of the European Union. You know, maybe it's a good thing for us to be a part of the European Union. So the vote was held again. And sure enough, it was approved. Quickly, the few holdouts began to ratify. And then on November the 3rd, 2009, the last nation to ratify was the nation of the Czech Republic. They ratified, and when they did, the Holy Roman Empire was reborn. November 3rd, 2009, the entity that is to be in power on this earth at the time of the Antichrist, the false prophet, the entity that's to be in power on this earth at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ was born, and it is now born today. Now, we're going to a video clip right now, and you're going to actually witness the signing. Now, notice the signing is held in a monastery. Why there? That's interesting. Does that have something to do with religion and politics? Here all these political leaders are at this monastery, and you're actually going to watch as world leader after world leader places their signature on this document. Notice how historic it is. Notice how much importance they're placing in all this. And they're right. They know what they're doing. They know that this is a huge turning point, that they are giving birth to the Holy Roman Empire once again. Watch this.
Da assinatura do Tratado de
This enlarged European Union
Bundesrepublik Deutschland.
Reino dos Países Baixos.
Het Koninkrijk der Nederlanden.
Finally, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
There's going to be a Mr. Europe, if you like, a permanent president, and a foreign minister of Europe. And those people are designed by this treaty to get more power over time, so that Europe becomes more centralized, so that more power passes to Brussels away from the nation states. And we think that that is taking Europe in the wrong direction.
So there you have it. You just witnessed the signing of the treaty, of the Constitution of the United States of Europe. America has its Constitution. Now the European Union has its Constitution. The last member, as we stated earlier, ratified on November the 3rd,